Good evening, everyone. I hope you all had a restful and happy Thanksgiving. I'm excited for you all to be joining us, particularly as I know many of our students are still either finishing up finals or just wrapped up finals. So I am extremely grateful for for the panelists that we have here. All are stellar in their respective areas, so I'm grateful for them for joining us. Just as a matter of template, the way this will go, I will introduce each of the panelists, and then I will ask each of them to tell us a bit more about themselves and their respective practice areas. From then, I have a list of probably 7 to 8 questions that I've come up with, talking with various students that I will ask each panelist. I will direct each question at a particular panelist, but you all can feel free to jump in where you see fit. Just as a matter of organization, I will proceed in that way. For students who are joining us, I encourage you all to send any questions you may have directly to me through using the chat function. And I'll try my best to get as many of those questions in as possible. And any questions that I don't get answered, I will send you a response via email. So today we have a great group of attorneys with us, starting with our attorneys from Latham Watkins. We have Jason Ewert, who's a corporate counsel in their New York office. Tara Elliott, who's a litigation and trial partner in the Washington, D.C. office. Nicole Sanjual, who's a finance partner in their New York office. From Cooley, we have Megan Melbourne, who's a corporate associate in the New York office. From DLA Piper, we have Holly Lake, who's a litigation partner in the LA office, and Jerry Williams, who's a corporate partner in the Atlanta office. So thank you all for being here with us. And I'll allow you all a few minutes to just talk a bit more about your practice area, a little bit about where you went to law school, and we can start with our attorneys from Latham, followed by Cooley and DLA Piper, and I'll ask Ms. Tara to start.
Great. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the last part. Did you pass the mic to me?
Yes, I did. My apologies.
Okay. No, that's okay. Good evening, everybody. Really happy to be here with you all. I'm glad that you're taking the time out for this, despite what is a very busy time of the year. My name is Tara Elliott. I'm a partner in the DC office of Latham Watkins. I'm in the IP litigation practice group, so I primarily do patent, trademark, and other related IP disputes, primarily of patent infringement nature, representing both plaintiff and defendant side. My background is in computer engineering and in the intelligence community. And I've been at Latham for almost 3 years. So really thrilled to be talking with this group this evening and look forward to this conversation and dialogue.
Next we can have Jason or Nicole.
Sure, I'm happy to go next. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Sanjual. I am a partner in the New York office of Latham Watkins. I'm in the bank finance group within the finance department. So I primarily represent banks and other financial institutions in a variety of lending transactions, largely in connection with, acquisition financings and leverage buyouts and those types of things. I have been at Latham just about 11 years now. I started my career at Latham. I came straight out of law school and have been here ever since.
Jason.
Hey everyone, good to see so many faces. So my name is Jason Ewert. I'm a counsel in the capital markets group in the New York office of Latham. I've been with Latham for about 2.5 years now. My practice focuses on high yield notes offerings. Similar to Nicole, a lot of my offerings are in connection with leverage buyouts, so it's acquisition finance. When we're not doing acquisition financings, I also do liability management, so helping issuers manage their debt. And this year I've worked on a number of restructurings and bankruptcies, including the GNC bankruptcy. Excited to talk to you guys today.
Megan.
Great. Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Megan Melbourne. I'm an associate at the Cooley office in New York, and my practice is strictly M&A. I think the easiest way to think about that, if you're not familiar, is basically buying and selling companies and then moving money from one pocket to another. My practice entails mostly private work, but also public deals, and those can be cross-border or domestic, usually in the life sciences, technology, or consumer product spaces.
Thank you. Holly?
Hello, everyone. Thank you. It's still afternoon for me here in Los Angeles, so good afternoon. I am a partner at DLA Piper, and I'm actually a partner in the Labor and Employment Group. I am an employment litigator and employment advisor representing myriad of employers, ranging from startups to Fortune 10 in all sorts of issues related to employment. So that means I could be representing corporations in wage and hour class actions or litigation related to discrimination, harassment, or any type of wrongful termination. And I provided advice counsel to clients. It's been very COVID heavy, obviously, especially in March and April. And then dealing with employees as we deal in this unique environment right now. But historically, advising clients on all sorts of issues is a way to manage their business, develop best practices, or avoid litigation. I started my practice. I've been practicing for about 21 years now. So I started my practice at Foley & Lardner. I was there for about 2 years and then transitioned to Paul Hastings. I was at Paul Hastings for 12 years. And then I was served to open up, I was a partner opening up a small boutique office in Los Angeles, and then transitioned as a partner to DLA Piper a little over 2 years ago.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Happy to be here. Remember back from Balsa days and serving as a Midwest Regional Director when I was at IU. So I had lots of fun with our national travels. I'm a partner in the Atlanta office for DLA, serving a number of capacities. A couple head the corporate group in Atlanta, serve on our U.S. steering committee for our private equity group, and also chair our African American resource group in the U.S. And my practice is similar to Megan's in that I do M&A, buying and selling companies. I spend probably the bulk of my time working with private equity funds, do a little international work, represent a handful of kind of Fortune 1000 companies, doing just about anything across the globe. I've been at DLA for 12 and a half years, practicing for 25 years. And I said the first 12 and a half years of my career was a bit adventurous in that I worked in Dallas for a couple of years, worked in Milwaukee for a few years, moved to Atlanta and worked at a couple of different types of firms before I ended up settling at DLA, and been here the entire second half of my career.
Thank you all for sharing. So we'll start with the first question. This program is really centered around how to best practices for interviews. But I think before we jump into interviews, we should talk about how students should prepare for these interviews. Once they find out various employers they will interview with and they get their list of employers, do you have any best practices for how students should go about doing their research, learning more about the firm, learning more about their panelists, so that way they can have more fruitful experience? And I'll throw it back to Jerry, since you just finished this up.
Back to me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I guess I will approach it on just how I interview. I always interview, if I'm going to interview 10 people or however many people, the first person sets the baseline. So I'll pick a number from 1 to 10, and whatever that person scores, whether they score 4 or 7 or 8, that's the baseline, and everybody else is pegged up or down based on how that first person performed. And that's just the easiest way for me to view it. And the most important component for me and how I'd like for people to prepare is, I don't really care what their answers are to what I ask them. I care more about what they are asking me. And I'm looking for something that's different from the 2 or 3 questions that you get from career services. And more specifically, I'm looking for questions related to motivation and self-motivation, and questions related to where they ultimately want to get, because those 2 kind of character traits tell me whether or not I think that person can survive, and not only survive but stand out in the private law firm environment.
I'll throw it to Megan since I've seen you agree.
Yeah, I totally agree with Jerry. I think the best way to approach an interview from the student point of view is treat it like a first date where you're doing everything that you're not supposed to do. So I don't know about you guys, but when I go on a first date, I Google the person, I find out where they went to school, what their different interests are, what they've been up to lately. And we're taught normally don't bring that up on the date. You don't want to tell your date that you've been Googling them. But when you're speaking with an interviewer from a law firm, that's really your moment to impress upon them how much research you've done. I know that when I interview law students, I'm always impressed by the law students who bring up a recent deal that I worked on and have questions about that. So they'll say something like, oh, you know, I saw that you just closed this deal with X Corp. What was a really challenging element of it? It's not even so much, and it's exactly what Jerry says, it's not so much the content of their question or the conversation. It's more so that I know that they've done the research and that the answers they're giving me aren't canned and couldn't be repeated to several other interviewers. It's that they focused on me. So definitely prepare. Another tip too that I think some law students make a mistake of in terms of research is that if you go into an interview wanting to do a specific specialty or practice area, make sure that the firm that you're speaking to actually does that. I know it seems pretty obvious, but so many people will interview with the firm that only does litigation and will say, oh, I'd really like to do transactional work. Or they'll say, oh, you know, I'd really like to do emerging companies with a law firm that doesn't have that practice group. So definitely focus in on your interviewer and find out what you can about them, and also make sure that you find out about what the different practice offerings are there.
Can I add something?
Yes, feel free to drop
Sure.
in.
Great. So I currently serve as the hiring partner for the Los Angeles office. So I have an opportunity to interview quite a few students. Sort of taking what Gary has said as well as what Megan said, it's imperative to do the research on the firm, but more than just, you know, doing a quick search and see what practice groups are on the website. I have found that everyone does that. And so as I'm comparing students in terms of their preparation, what I'm looking for and what my colleagues say is most impactful are the students that have taken an opportunity to not only understand what we do, but figure out what that means. You know, don't just come to me and say, I want to be in an international firm, because I'm going to ask you why. And the response shouldn't be because I want to travel to other offices. You know, you need to figure out, which I've heard, you need to figure out what that means for you. And what that means for the type of practice that you think you may want to have or that you're willing to consider. Understand the background of the attorneys that you're going to be interviewing with. Not only look at their firm website, look at their LinkedIn profile. What will distinguish you, though, is how you end up communicating to the other attorneys, how you've done the research. I find it most impactful to not say, well, I know you did this, or I know you did that. It's, I'm interested in litigation, and I know that in the course of perhaps representing, you know, people who may be accused of sexual harassment, you may have done, you know, it's weaving what you've researched about me into a substantive question so that I know you've done the research, but you've also figured out a way to make it tailored to this experience. So be a little bit more thoughtful, a little more creative, rather than just parroting what you see on a website.
Do our attorneys from Latham have anything else to add?
I'd like to add a little something. One thing I would say in terms of doing research, I agree with everything that's been said. Going through this process, I know it can be a bit overwhelming in terms of time management and the volume that you're dealing with. So you may just feel it's impossible to do the level of research that we're describing for every interviewer that you're going to meet with. And that can be challenging, and it can be really throw you off when there's a last minute change on the interviewer end about who the person is. So you've got to sort of strategize about how to best spend your time, you know, focusing on the firm more than the person may be one way to go, just because that person could change. But it's good to have some basic knowledge as well. And sort of to Holly's point, generally speaking, all these points that we're talking about that you want to highlight about why you're interested in this firm or what's interesting about this interviewer's practice, it's great to have a way to tie that back into your resume and your skill set, and make that part of the dialogue. Because you don't want to just say, I think you're great because you do all of this, but it's also, and here's why I'd be a great addition to that.
Yeah,
If I could just pick back on Nicole's point.
No, go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. I want to piggyback on something Nicole said, because it happens rather frequently that schedules change. And going back to some earlier comments, it is absolutely a baseline expectation that you have prepared for the interview. And it's not always visible, transparent, or communicated to the attorneys on your list whether the schedule changed, what you received in advance of the schedule. I've learned after the fact that some people didn't get a schedule in advance, and if you haven't gotten one, you should definitely ask for one. If for whatever reason you aren't getting one until you start, I think it's prudent to let your interviewers know if you're asking questions that they may presume that was available to you. Because I have had interviews where people will ask me things that are just patently available if they just did even 3 minutes of research before the interview. And it's a real turnoff. I later found out that there was a schedule change and they didn't have my information or know I was going to be on their schedule. If I'd have known that, I probably wouldn't have held it as badly against them. But you should know that it's an absolute baseline expectation that you do some research. For those of you who are familiar with IP, there's kind of two approaches. There's patent prosecution, IP prosecution, there's litigation. We don't do patent prosecution at all. So people who come in the interview and start talking about prosecution tells me there's not much work that's been done. So even if you don't know much about me as an individual, it is a real knock for someone to come in and ask questions that really are the answers to which are readily available. So you're hearing some themes here, but preparation is so important. Even if you don't know your individual schedule, know the firm. If you are asking questions of somebody that could be found out, let them know that you didn't have that lineup in advance. Be transparent in communicating that so it's not held against you.
Yeah, I think the one thing I just wanted to add, I agree with everything that everyone said. I think one of the best ways to prepare for any interview is to know your CV cold. One of the things that I find helpful or at least meaningful is before I go into an interview, I may be interviewing 5 students back to back, and I may not have a ton of time to spend with someone's CV. So I'll find things that I find interesting and want to discuss with the candidate. It's really helpful for me if the candidate, or it's really impactful if they can do a deep dive into something they worked on or something they studied. So if you worked, if you did a thesis in college, being able to discuss that in depth, or if you tell me you're interested in, again, M&A, explaining, why that is, or if you follow something in the news, again, it's something that again, if you don't have time because the schedule changed and you don't know the interview that well or the firm that well, if you can do a deep dive into your own CV, it kind of shows a level of intellectual curiosity that I think most firms are eager to, attract students who have that level of curiosity. So that's something just, to keep in the back of your mind.
And don't stretch the truth on your CV.
Thank you all for question. That leads well into our next question. So you all have mentioned that at the bare minimum, you expect students to have done their research on the firm and their interviewers when possible. So how can students stand apart from their peers during the interview process? Can you all reflect on? You all have done a ton of interviews. Can you talk about maybe in particular a specific interviewer that stood out to you? Besides covering all of the bases, what about that interview, you thought was perhaps more successful than some of the other ones you had? And we can start with Holly.
So there's been a few different things. And that goes back to something that Jason said about the deep dive. I tend not to be impressed with someone who's just going to repeat what's on their CV. I want you to have taken your prior experience and learn something from it and communicate that to me and communicate how that's going to impact your practice as an attorney. Or take an interest or a hobby and communicate how that will translate. Demonstrate some insight and demonstrate some thought. find a way to distinguish yourself. Most people that we're going to interview have gone to, a certain school, or they have a certain GPA. Many have not worked prior to going to law school. To the extent you have, find something in your past work experience that can distinguish the way you're thinking, the way you envision your future. Find something unique to talk about that will be impactful in the workplace. Like you said, we interview a lot of people. Sometimes they blur. You need to find something intellectual to stand out.
If I could add,
Jalen, you're muted.
that.
You're on mute.
Thank you so much. 4 months of this and still not done with it. If anyone else has anything to add, feel free to add.
Go ahead, Nicole, if you were into.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna add, when you say, I agree with all of that, and Jason mentioned the deep dive in the CV, sort of reminded me of some of my best interviews over my time. I currently serve on our recruiting committee with Jason, so we've been doing a lot of interviews as well. But sort of a level of engagement and enthusiasm about experience. Like, don't just repeat something that you've done and, yeah, I did this and this has happened and this is why it's a skill. But if you show that you are passionate about it or enthusiastic about it, or excited about it, or what you learned from it, that excites the interviewer. Like, we get motivated by that as well, and make you stand out more than other candidates who just sort of, relay facts without feeling.
And I'll hit it from a little bit different. I'm probably a difficult person to answer this question because I very much pick who I think is a good candidate based on feel, and that's after a baseline of your school, your grades, and all of that. That stuff kind of equals itself out. But then above and beyond that, I'm looking for a feel. So the flip side of it is if someone can understand that you're not going to be able to cover everything you think you want to cover. And so you really have to say, if there are 2 or 3 things that I want to get the interviewer to leave this interview with, here are the things that I'm going to hit. And so strategic. I'm looking for someone to be very strategic about how they display themselves. And, a lot of times, the ones that impress are ones who end up crying or something. I'm just joking. That was a joke. No, the ones who, but related to that, if I want someone who makes me walk away believing that they want the job. And at the end of the day, however you display that, I have had an international student that could relate international business, their undergraduate degree, their LLM, being an M&A attorney on the security side, and how tax interrelates to that. And dude just broke all of that down, and he blew my head. I walked out of there kind of amazed that he had spent that much time, and he was calling me from Korea on due to the pandemic. And so I was just blown away. And one more example is someone had, they broke down their geographic experience, where they've lived, where they went to school, and they created a pattern of what they were trying to build up to. And the pattern was ending in a large metropolitan area, and everything that they had done, from going to college at a small town to going to law school in a big town to interning in a mid city, and everything was building up to this is the next logical step. And I was amazed that they took the time to think about a story like that, whether it was true or not. But
to Gary's point, though, that they built a narrative. And so if you build a story and you build your brand, and then you find a way to communicate it, you look thoughtful, you look insightful, and you distinguish yourself from that person who's just like, yeah, I had this job, and I had this job, and now hire me.
Thank you. So I think that leads well into our next one. So we talked about some best practices, what works. Are there any pet peeves that you all have that, I mean, I imagine you've seen a whole gamut of different approaches from students. Are there any major things that stick out to each of you that you think students should stay away from? And we can start with Jason.
Thanks. I think probably the biggest pet peeve I've ever had is sometimes interviewees can be too informal. You know, I try to make them feel welcome, feel comfortable, you know, so they're not nervous and not jittery. But then sometimes people run with that a little too much. And the interview ends and I'm not left with anything. I have no fodder to take back to the recruiting committee. You know, we didn't really touch on anything in depth. So I think that's probably one of the biggest pet peeves is people sometimes just forget, hey, this is an interview, you know, not your friend. We need to evaluate you at the end of the day. And I think aside from that, I think we kind of touched on it already, but probably just being unprepared. And I think this really speaks, for me at least, the biggest pet peeve for me is when people are unprepared as it comes to their own CV or their own talking points. So I think one of the things people have mentioned already is try not to just relay something or parrot something back. You know, it's the buzz. Your classmates are all saying they're interested in like IP or they're interested in something. I mean, if you say you're interested in something, like you back it up. Like we're going to do a deep dive. So, and I sometimes people say, oh, look, I'm really interested in, you know, capital markets. I want to do IPO work. And, you know, if you look at my CV, I don't do equity. I don't do IPOs. So, you know, that it's not great for me to hear, but I'm willing to go down the rabbit hole with you. But you walk me through an IPO you've been following. If people can't, you know, have that conversation, then it's just a bit awkward because then I'm left thinking this is just a talking point you have. And, you know, at 2 a.m. in the morning, I want to work with someone who's going to do a deep dive on an issue. And so we can all go to bed. I don't want to be with the person who's just parroting back, you know, something that they, you know, they heard from someone else. So biggest pet peeve is probably being unprepared and probably being too informal.
So may I chime in on that? I couldn't agree more with Jason. But I need to talk about this informality point for a moment because it almost seems like it's so obvious that we shouldn't be talking about it, but we're talking about it because we see it a lot. And, you know, I recently had an interview with someone who took the interview from her couch. She had a top on that was sleeveless. And at some point she like propped her arm up on the couch and I literally saw her hair and underarms. It was shocking. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen, that not only the casual nature of the interview, but like, I just literally was taken aback and I was distracted for the rest of the interview, like literally seeing this posture. And, you know, she was also very informal in her communication. And obviously there's a very careful balance. Want to see people's
Someone has a lot.
I think you're on mute.
Try this again. All right. There's a balance to strike. That you want to be informal enough to convey your true authentic self, but you need to treat the interview like an interview. And that's everything from your background to the posture, to your height, the camera vis-a-vis your eyes. You don't want to be looking down into the camera. You don't want to be looking up into the camera. You know, obviously during this pandemic, there are atmospheric issues that people can't control. And if you're in that situation, again, be upfront at the beginning of the interview to say, you know what, I am in a space that I can't completely control. I've just done the best I can to do X, Y, Z, but be communicative about it so that people don't assume you haven't been thoughtful about it. But we really do need to be treating interviews like the formal communications they actually are. You really are trying to make a good first impression. And unfortunately, we see way too much of informality. And then I would just say the second pet peeve for me, substantively, is the culture question and answer. You know, this is just one person's view, so you can take it for what it's worth. But I think that word culture is overused. It's broad. It's imprecise. It doesn't mean anything, and it means different things to everybody. And I feel like it's something to experience and observe but it's an annoying topic for me, just personally. So when I ask, why Latham and people say culture, it's annoying to me. I hate when people ask me about the culture. Like, I feel like there's so much other fertile ground to cover other than talking about culture, which frankly to me is different from office to office, even within firms. It's different in practice groups, even within firms and within offices. It's just too variable to be a helpful, relevant subject matter for an interview, in my opinion.
Can I piggyback off something that Tara just said? On the culture point, when I get people that say, what's the culture like? Or I want a firm that's great culture, I typically say, what do you mean by that? I push back on it because, to Tara's point, it means something different. And I feel like that is a question that comes from career services. And I don't think that it's been internalized to really be anything more than a throwaway. So I'm going to push you. So don't do it, in my opinion. Also, to the informal, formal nature of things, I think you need to remember that multiple things are going on in an interview. The person interviewing you not only is trying to see if you like an intellectual challenge, if you're smart, if you are committed to the practice of law in some form or fashion, they're also trying to see, can I take you to a client? Do you understand what's appropriate? Can I introduce you to my internal colleagues or my internal clients? Do you understand what's right versus what's wrong in terms of timing? To Tara's point about raising your arm and having the sleeveless shirt, I will dress for certain Zoom meetings in certain different ways. When I'm talking to some of my associates in the office, I may not be in a jacket, but you have to tailor your presentation because you have that judgment. So the interview is trying to get to know your intellect, trying to assess your judgment, but also trying to assess somewhat of your personality, because at the end of the day, we work together a lot and everyone will want to work with someone they actually like being around versus someone they don't. But also you have to remember, and I don't want to be flip, I know everyone wants a job, but at the end of the day, you are also interviewing the firm. And you have to come prepared with understanding what's important to you and try to elicit that, because the last thing you want to do is end up at a place that's not meant for you, because it won't work.
Yeah, I had not realized or put my finger on just how much I hate the culture question until Tara said it. Yeah, that really, you really ought to take that home with you, and because it's not possible for a 10,000 person or firm with 10,000 employees to have one culture or whatever. But the one thing I wanted to point out, some of these things in isolation don't seem like big deals. Like the culture question in isolation. Okay, so you ask the question, Tara's not going to like it, I'm not going to like it, and in fact, I throw the question back in a way that probably makes some people uncomfortable. But or whatever the point is, in isolation, these things aren't big deals. The point we're trying to get across is, when you go into an interview, you want to walk out with 0 distractions. And to the extent you have 1, 2, 3, 5, 10 distractions, then that puts you at a disadvantage. And so that's the way you should think about it. How do I eliminate potential distractions, and not the gravity of one point any one of us make over the other? But for me personally, the one thing that I do not like, and that is a big negative, is a lot of times, we all know the interviews are going to be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, one or the other. And, I map out how much time I'm going to take with my questions, how much time I'm going to take with their questions, give them to answer questions. And I get down, and I've had interviews at 30-minute interviews, and at minute 21, it's at the point where I've turned over and said, what questions do you have for me? They ask one question, and then as do you have any more questions, they're done. And so they've just given up 9 minutes of the interview. It's like, well, why do I need to talk to this person any further? So that, you want to be the person where you use up all your time, you use every opportunity to put your best foot forward. And so what if someone else, the next person knocks on the door? They can't get in until you walk out. So use your time. Use your time.
If I could just add to that, what Jay just said, I think that's a great point. I guess one of my, just answer the question that was asked, the pet peeve is related to the point about not being prepared, is when you just get the standard generic questions, or it's obvious when we do open it up to you for questions that you don't have anything prepared that's really thoughtful than those generic questions. That's really frustrating. But every interviewer has a different style, and they may have, you know, a outline of targeted questions that they thought out in advance, or maybe be more obvious about, tell me a time where you worked in a team effort and showed leadership. You know, that's obvious what they're trying to get at. But some of it's very much intended to be open-ended and for allowing you the opportunity to highlight your strengths and skills. So, you know, this is your time to do that. Use that time, use every question to bring it back to what you have to offer. You know, we may ask you to describe something you worked on, or, you know, what paper you did or what class you took. Tie that back to how that's going to impact what you're interested in, what you want to do going forward with this firm, or how it's related to this person's practice and why that made you interested in this firm, or whatever it may be, and how that relates to other skills that you have to offer. You know, you want to bring it back to your selling points and make sure that the interviewer at the end of the interview leaves feeling good about the possibility of working together.
Let me hit a quick point, just in case this is the situation for a number of people. I saw someone had ask the question about what is the culture question, and we didn't necessarily set it up, but you get the question to say, can you tell me what the culture of DLA Piper is like? And so that's like someone expecting Cooley, Nicole to say, not Nicole, I'm sorry, Megan to say, you know, Cooley 10 years ago was a high-tech firm and our culture across the board is all high-tech related, or then me to say the same thing about DLA because one of our predecessor firms were one of the big, you know, .com type firms. That's the question, and so we don't really know what people are expecting the answer to be, but the assumption is they're asking the question because they think there's one kind of, you know, static culture across the firm. So that's what we're getting at.
Got it. Thank you all. So, and there's a lot of talk about this culture question. So in lieu of that question, would a better question to be perhaps more directed at your particular panelists as to what drew them to the firm, what interested them in the firm, instead of asking, you know, about culture in general, as you all talked about, global law firms with various offices, different people, different personalities. Should that question be more geared to trying to get a sense of what, you know, stood out to that particular panelist and what drove them to the firm, and perhaps that could, you know, provide some insight to that student and as they're trying to make their decision, you know, between your firm and another firm, or just your firm in general?
Yeah,
You could ask why you came to the firm and why you stay.
exactly.
Thank you all.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
Oh, no, you're fine. That's exactly what I was going to say, Holly. It's not so much why Latham, why DLA, why Cooley. It's more of what keeps you at the firm. And I think that's a better way of talking about the culture, because the lawyer may say, oh, you know, the work is very challenging, or we have certain affinity groups that I'm really proud of and that I'm cultivating. And that sort of gets you, I think, to the answer. But I actually agree with all of the panelists. And like Jerry, I didn't realize just how empty that question is, but when in doubt, avoid it. Definitely avoid it.
So our next question is, and I'll direct it at Megan, followed by Jason and Nicole, and then the rest can feel free to answer after. Our associates, Megan, you being an associate, Jason, you being a counsel, and Nicole, you being a partner, are you guys looking for different things in the interviews? Because obviously the panels will consist of, you'll have some associates, we might have a junior, senior associate, some partners, counsels, and then you'll also meet with various people, you know, from recruiting directly. Are the different groups looking for something in particular, or can you reflect on, Nicole, perhaps when you were an associate, were you more focused on one thing versus now as a partner, what's most important to you? So Megan, you can start, followed by Jason, and then.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a nuanced question. I think Holly said it best, and I think Jerry even got to it in broad strokes, is that when you are interviewing students on campus or over OCI, as the attorney, you then have to go back to the talent department and explain why you think this person is a standout. And you definitely want to choose someone who's not only going to reflect the firm well, but also your judgment. And so when you are interviewing a student, you're thinking, if I present this person to the talent department and I basically vouch for what I think their potential could be, is this someone who could best represent me going forward when they speak with my colleagues and peers? Will my colleagues wonder what exactly I saw in this person? Is this someone who I think can go the distance? But I think to answer your question, at the associate level, when I'm interviewing other associates, and I guess it would be someone more junior than me, my thoughts are, is this person someone who displays good judgment? So it's exactly what Tara said. Are they wearing appropriate clothing? Is their background such that it's not distracting? Right? Is this someone who seems reliable? Are they on time? Are they punctual? As Jason has said, do they know their CV like the back of their hand? Is this someone where if I have to step away for an hour or two, I would trust them at the wheel? For me, from the associate level, it's not so much a substantive knowledge, which you don't expect from a second or third year law student. What I'm really zeroing in on is, does this person have good judgment? And does this person seem like someone who can eventually fill the shoes of a good junior associate should I have to turn away for 5 minutes?
Yeah, I think I would echo everything Megan just said. I mean, that hits the nail on the head. I mean, as I don't think necessarily I view associates differently as a counsel, but I will say when I was a junior attorney doing interviews, it was more about fit. Like, can I see this person at my firm? Would they fit in? Would they do well? I think now, as more senior attorney, I think I am taking into account other factors that the firm's looking for when building out, let's say, a summer associate class, or trends in the development of like the attorneys at the firm, what we're looking for in a certain office, what we're looking for in a practice group. So those things are in my mind. So again, for a summer associate, it's usually not that big an issue in terms of differences what I'm looking for. Usually more with lateral attorneys that comes into play. But that's something that, again, it is a factor to keep in mind. I think also just, as you're listening to the panelists speak, be mindful of what the partners are saying versus what I'm saying versus what Megan is saying. And that'll give you a feel for like what people think is really important for in a candidate when they're going back to talk to the recruiting committee or anyone else within the firm.
Yeah, I agree with everything that folks have said so far. I think it's not intentional that folks at different levels, associates, counsel, partners, may be looking for something different. I think it's just a difference in our experience level and what information we have based on what the firm is looking for. So someone who's maybe a mid-level associate may not be part of the conversation with, at Latham we do things by committee, with the recruiting committee who's talking to the executive committee about what our strategic goals are for the summer class. So they don't have the same things in mind, and they really be focused on things like enthusiasm about our firm and really seeming to perceive the eagerness to have this job and overall fit and personality, whereas someone more senior may be thinking more critically about, oh, this person's got this kind of skill set that we really need to build out in this practice group. That could be really helpful background, and we should be thinking about that. So I think it's more not an intentional difference, but just because of the different position that the interviewer is in, that they might be trying to achieve slightly different focus goals.
Thank you. So obviously we've all been navigating this virtual world for the past 8 months, but it feels much longer. So many students are often worried about, well, most of them will be taking these interviews, doing these rounds of interviews in their homes, opposed to, in school in person, where they don't have to worry about background noise and distractions. So it's a big worry for students that can't control necessarily their background. So is the expectation that they do these rounds of interviews in a library, if they have access, or or will employers be understanding of the fact that, if you have a few younger siblings, you naturally can't control that they might, venture into the room or might be loud. So we can start with Tara. So,
sure. And I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's worth kind of talking about it some greater length here because of the circumstances we're all living in, and some of which are just out of our control, and health and safety should be primary during this period. So I would not necessarily advise people to go leave your home and go somewhere where your safety and health may be an issue to do that. But I do think it behooves you to, make every effort possible to make your interview about showcasing why you should get a callback or why you should get an offer. And, you have these 20-minute, 30-minute, whatever these interview slots are. You have a captive audience for 30 minutes. And, people are then going to weigh in and judge you. That's what this process calls for. And little things can just throw off your interview and make you slot a little lower. If we use, is it Jerry or Gary, by the way? I just want to make sure I get that right.
It's Gary. It's Gary.
It's Gary with,
Hard G.
okay. So that's an important thing. Know how to pronounce people's names, like do that research as well, right? Like these little things matter because once you go off, when you call me Tara, I'm already turned off. I know that sounds petty, but like we get to interview all these like amazing students. And sometimes it's really hard to differentiate because I meet, Albert and he's amazing. And then I meet Taylor and she's amazing. And I'm like, well, how do I differentiate between these really talented folks? And so these little things end up making a difference. Somebody mispronounced my name. Somebody didn't know, that I was a lateral because they just didn't do a Google search. Someone didn't know that we don't do this kind of practice area. Those little things end up making a difference. So are the atmospherics. So if you are approaching your interview too informally based on your background, or you don't communicate transparently in advance that you have some limitations in that regard, it may be held against you. Is it fair? Is it a little uptight? Maybe it's unfair. Maybe it's a little uptight. But my point is to you is that there's a ton of students, a lot of talented students, really difficult to differentiate sometimes. So you got to put your best shot out there. And that means doing whatever you can to eliminate distractions, to make sure that people are focused on you, the substance of your background and fitness for the organization, and getting to know you better. And so all these other little things, as somebody already said earlier, can add up to a place where you get ranked lower than the first person or second or third person interviewed. And those little things can be the difference between not getting a callback or not getting an offer.
Yeah, just to add.
I do think. Okay.
Go ahead, Holly.
No, go ahead.
I said just to add to that, and I echo not needing to go out into the environment and put yourself at risk. But I do think that if an interview is important enough, you got to find a way to eliminate, all of the other distractions to try to have that uninterrupted environment. But at the end of the day, you're not going to lose a job opportunity because of it, but it might be the last item to cause you to lose an opportunity because, but hey, if you look at me, I may have 2 people ranked at an 8, and for whatever reason in my mind, the person that didn't have a distraction, what is going to come across to me is, man, that person's interview was crisp. Not even from the human side of me, not even thinking, the reason I thought that person's interview was crisp is because the other person had interruptions. So it's it's not fair sometimes, but that stuff does matter a little bit.
So I'd say, practically speaking, in this environment, change your background if you need to. Add some lighting if you need to. I know of people who've taken meetings in a closet because that's the only place they could get quiet, but they had a background, they had lighting, you wouldn't know they were in the closet. Literally, if that's what you need to do, that's what you need to do. If you have someone that comes on screen, a child, a sibling, etc., that's unexpected, I think you're best owning it. Don't pretend like it's not happening. I'd say, excuse me, my 3-year-old, just did whatever. And then this is a little harder, but this is something that I do. I have a 3-year-old. She does not like to be quiet all the time. So oftentimes when I'm on these occasions, I switch it back to mute when I'm not speaking, so you can't hear the background commotion. Now, can I adjust that if she happens to be yelling something while I'm speaking? No, but I own it and say, I'm sorry, you know, and you can make light of it, but at least you've acknowledged it and you're not trying to pretend like it's not there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I know half of you probably saw my daughter came and give me a kiss. Good night. And I found out that the better way is for me to just do that and let her go on about her business, as opposed to having a bigger distraction and dealing. And most times it gets me points with my audience anyway.
Yeah, I think another practical tip with names and other information is use the resources that you have. If you're interviewing with someone whose name could be confusing or is confusing, feel free to call their secretary. All of this information is available on their website tear page, or you can just call like the local number for their law firm. Call them and ask them, how do you pronounce Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so's name? And then you can just hang up. And so when you go into the interview the next day, you know how to pronounce their name. And I think Tara said it best. It sounds petty, but when someone does get your name right, it stands out. And it's something that, that you definitely remember when you're evaluating candidates.
Can I also add one more point? It's going to be imperative for you all to remember that every interaction you have with someone, you are being evaluated. Whether it's the mock interview that you may do with someone, or we're not doing lunches anymore, but to the extent we can go out in the world with lunches, every interaction you have with someone that's a potential employer until you get hired, and quite frankly, sometimes even after you get hired, you're making an impression. And you have to make sure that that impression is the impression that you want to make. And so, quite frankly, that includes these panels as well. You're making an impression.
Yeah, one thing I would add to that, actually, I totally agree with Holly. I think that's really important, especially when it comes to follow-up questions. I know a lot of interviewees will jump at the opportunity. I'll say, hey, reach out, give me a call whenever, and they will, which is fine. But you know, I'm no longer not interviewing or not assessing you because you've reached out 3 days later to ask questions. So, you know, those questions should still be thoughtful. You know, I'm busy. I don't like my time to be wasted. And so if someone reaches out and calls and we're on the phone for a half hour, you know, if I'm not blown away, I'm more annoyed than anything else. And so you be mindful of that. You know, if you want to reach out and ask someone questions, do so, but be thoughtful, be mindful of their time, and be mindful of the impression you're leaving them with. You know, sometimes people talk, you know, we talk for an hour and it's like, wow, you know, that's an hour of my life I'll never get back. So just be very thoughtful about what you're asking someone and like when you're reaching out.
Thank you all.
You know, I have to say, if you take nothing else away from this panel, what Holly just said is so critically important. You are being evaluated. Every interaction, every writing. I probably sound really anal with all the comments as I've reviewed them in my head, but I'm going to tell you, sending emails, follow-up emails with typos, with my name is spelled, it's a complete, I'm just writing people off. I mean, because most of the people you're interacting with are really busy. So their time, we bill our time in 6-minute increments. And I know as students, some of you aren't appreciating just yet what that means in terms of time, but time is like a really valuable thing for us. So when we're taking time, you know, we need you to appreciate that this is something we're cutting out to do it. Talking to you right now, we're cutting out some stuff to talk to you right now, to have an interview with you, to follow up behind the interview. And so I'm sharing this with you, and Holly's point is resonating with me, and I want it to resonate with you because I get that you don't have the life experiences, some of you yet, in context to understand this time element. And so when you get someone's time, make the most of it, maximize it, because you're being evaluated. And if you waste the opportunity, you've kind of lost it for a lot of people. They have moved on because they don't have a lot of time. That being said, we care about you. We want to see you in this profession. We need you in this profession. So we need you to constantly be leveling up. Understanding what it is we're sharing with you matters, and we're judged more harshly. So your writings need to be on point. No typos. Please don't misspell my last name. It's a pet peeve. In addition to being called Tara, right? You know, so these sound little things, but like they happen, and then helps me to eliminate, you know, who I'm going to spend time on. And I have to do that because there's so many things, you know, requiring our time. That is everybody, every lawyer who's speaking on this panel has to every day triage and decide how they're going to spend time. And so I just have to emphasize and underscore Holly's point. You are being evaluated with every interaction.
Thank you. In interest of time, unfortunately, we've already reached 8 o'clock. So I just want to thank you all. And in closing, I would just ask that if each attorney can just leave our students with some parting words of encouragement as they finish up finals and go into this, you know, on-campus interview season, whether it's at a firm, you know, government organization, in-house opportunity. If you can just share anything with them that can, you know, give them that final push as they close out the year, I'll be grateful. We can start with Gary, then Holly, Megan, Jason, Tara, and then end with Nicole.
Yeah, two parting shouts. One is, look, all you need is one job. But if you give yourself 10 opportunities, then you got to hit 10%. But if you give yourself 100 or whatever the number is, doesn't really matter what your percentage is. So basic message is apply for, if you think you need to apply for 10 jobs, apply for 50, 100, and to get that one opportunity. And then the last thing is, man, when you get that opportunity, you know, you got to run with it. I mean, you got to get out there and you have to leave no stone unturned. And my goal when I had my first summer internship at Foley & Lardner in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my goal was that at the end of that summer, they were going to believe that a Black kid from south of Savannah, Georgia, never been in the winter, wanted nothing else to do but live the rest of his life in snow in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And that's exactly what they believed, and I got the job. But you go after it, whatever way you need to go after it.
So a couple things. I see some questions coming in too, and I'll try to respond to at least one of those. It gets better. The practice of law can be fun. So recognize that, you know, this might be a challenging time, and obviously we're in a pandemic, but it does get better. I think you have the best shot at getting the job you want if you are authentic. The only way to be authentic in an interview is to have practice, because then you won't be so focused on the things you need to get said. You can actually take that and then be you. So I would say get whatever opportunity you have for mock interviews, mock with your friends, mock with your family, spitball ideas, and then just be you. One of the questions that came in was, what do we think about thank you letters? Personally, I don't like them. I think there's an opportunity in a thank you letter to make a mistake and to create a bad impression. So I personally would not recommend you doing thank you letters, whether it's email or snail mail. Those are my points.
I know we are out of time, but I really need to ask this question because I have, this is repeatedly asked in every interview. Is when they look at the resume, there is a panel, the first thing they say is, whoa, your resume is very stellar. You have a versatile experience. Tell us about yourself. So they open up saying, tell us about yourself. And you don't know what they want to hear in that question and how long it should be.
We can't hear you. We can't hear you.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. I'll take a quick stab at that. You know, people talk about elevator pitches. I kind of treat that phrase like I do culture. What does that mean? But there's a nice little nugget in that, which is you should have a little spiel that tells your story, the things that you're proud of that are compelling and that you can say succinctly. It's really an open book way to convey how unique and interesting and enthusiastic you are. And it's not for you to figure out what they want to hear, it's for you to share with them what you want them to know about you that's not on paper. And that is, go back to Holly's point again, you practice that. You know if you're going to get that question a lot, you can make that better and better and better with every time you answer it by actually giving it some forethought, and actually deliver that compellingly, authentically, and in a way that you get to decide what you're sharing and what's special about it. That can be done succinctly and compellingly if you practice it and think about it, I think, in advance. And I'll just end with my little comments because I've already talked enough. I just want to emphasize again, we need you in the profession. We want to see more of you. Our clients want to see more of you. Judges, juries want to see more of you. So I encourage you to stay the course, take every opportunity you can to level up, really hold yourself up to high expectations, because we're being judged, all of us. So thanks for joining tonight.
Yeah, I guess my one piece of advice for finals and the OCI process is to always remember rejection is protection. I remember what it was like being on your side of the fence. And in every interview you go to, you flub one and then you walk out feeling so dejected, or you get back your grades at the end of the semester and you didn't do as well as you thought. Echoing what Holly says, it does get better, and always know that if you put yourself out there and maybe you don't get the same response that you want, know that in the long run, you're going to end up exactly where you are, and every single no and every single not right now will make sense on the other side of the fence. So don't be too hard on yourself. If maybe you're not the best interviewer and your interview season is uncomfortable, and don't be too hard on yourself if you get your grades back and they're not where you want to be. You will end up exactly where you need to be at the exact time, and everything will work out. Just stay the course.
Yeah, so really briefly, I agree with Megan. I think one thing you should all take away from this is a number of the panelists mentioned like starting their careers different places, laddering around. Fortunately, Nicole's amazing. She was at Latham, she's a lifer. But I think the one thing to take away from this is that, your career path may not look the way you think it's going to look. But you'll end up where you need to be. So just keep that in mind, be flexible and be honest with yourself. And, to Tara's point, I think you should definitely level up. And by that, I mean, also just being mindful of your weaknesses too. I mean, you all look at your CV, you know what your weakness is, right? You know where you're interviewing. If they don't typically hire someone, from your school, or, there's just some gaps or holes, or your transcript isn't the best, whatever, be honest about that, own it. And make sure you have your story crisp. I did not have the best 1L grades by far. But I had lots of offers, and there's just a way to have a story and make sure that people understand what your story is. So good luck.
I'll just add my tips. I think I'm the last to go. To Tara's point, we need you. The firms want to see more of you, and there is a focus on that. And we want there to be room to add you here, and we look so forward to seeing that continue on. I know this year, as everyone knows, has been unprecedentedly challenging in many ways, but you are not alone in that, because all of your classmates are dealing with that, and all of us are dealing with that. And I think, there's a level of understanding and compassion that comes with the fact that we are in this shared experience. And as Tara mentioned several times, communicate that if you need to about the challenges you're facing in your circumstances. Don't think that that's not going to be well received, because we all know we're going through some stuff right now and need to be understanding of each other. So I think people will be receptive of that. And, thank you for being here, and I wish you all the best of luck.
And let me close it out with a quick couple of statistics, just so everybody on here understands that when the various panelists say we need you, that's not a buzzword or something these law firms are giving us to go out and say. And do your own research, but you look at, I was blown away when I had to start looking at these statistics that only 5% of licensed attorneys in the United States are African Americans. Blown away. And then you look at the numbers, most firms hover around 3.5% to 4% African American associates, 2 to 2.5% African American partners. And then you go to law schools, they're at 8.5%, of law school students are African Americans. Then you go to undergrad and you look at anywhere from, depending on what segment, anywhere from 15% up to as high as 25%, whether you're private, public, or what have you. And you look at the numbers, we are not getting enough African American or attorneys of color into the private sector. And it starts by getting more people like you to get out here and get these jobs. And that's why I'm encouraging you to try as many different avenues as possible. We really do need you guys. We need you guys to get in, and not only get in, we need you to succeed, period.
Thank you all. This panel, I was really looking forward to this panel. I've heard some of you all speak on this panel, so extremely grateful for you all taking the time to spend with our students, particularly around the holidays. So extremely grateful. To our students, thank you all for joining. I know many of you are still finishing up finals or just got out of finals, so I certainly appreciate you all being here with me. I will do my best to wrap up this recording, get it documented and put it up on our YouTube so that our students can watch it back and hear it again. And for those who registered but couldn't be here with us, I will stay on for about 15 minutes following this for anyone who has a direct question for me or needs any more information. But again, thank you all for being here with us. It really means a lot to me. Grateful to see you all. So happy holidays and stay safe.
Thank you, Jalen.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you so much.